This, the Pico 4, is a polarizing headset. Is it a Quest 2 killer or a TikTok-funded knockoff? Let's find out, probably, realistically, somewhere in between. Firstly, I'm saying all this from a PC VR streaming to the headset perspective, so if you want a review of it standalone, just don't look at it. This isn't going to be an in-depth look at Airlink or not Airlink, but Virtual Desktop or the Pico streaming software or ALVR, but I will be mentioning things related to those that are most relevant to the headset. The reason I support PC VR more is honestly just because standalone feels like a console. I feel restricted with it. I can't mess with it. And so whenever I buy games, I want to buy them on PC platforms so that I'm supporting PC development. I will get to the actual PC streaming stuff, but I think it's important to know what that's running on first. The Pico 4 has the same XR2 processor as the Quest 2, but it's clocked higher and has 2 gigs more of RAM. Probably thanks to that, at least the higher clocks. On here, it's much more obvious that there's a fan, though it's not particularly distracting. It's just you notice it before you get into a game, before there's any audio, you hear the whirring, but it doesn't get in the way of actually playing. Luckily, that powerful fan has a few benefits beyond just cooling the SoC better. It actually circulates the air around my eyes, which makes my face feel cooler when I'm in VR, so it keeps me less sweaty, and it keeps the lenses less sweaty. They don't fog up as much as they do on the Quest. It's not like they can't, but it's much improved. And while lenses are on our minds, those are the most shocking part of this headset. Do not try a VR headset with pancake lenses if you're not willing to buy it, because you're probably going to want it. I understood the benefits of pancake lenses beforehand, but the actual experience change is huge. Obviously, you could get wide FOVs before, and you could get relatively thin optical stacks before, but especially without the facial interface on, I'll give you B-roll of this rather than doing it in my hand right now, you can really see how quickly we're approaching the glasses form factor compared to previous VR headsets. These really are kind of the size of goggles, excluding the facial interface. The FOV is quite a bit wider than the Quest 2. I think it's about 7 degrees taller and 11 degrees wider, as far as I measured it. And although there are less God rays, which is nice, like that is pretty much gone from Fresnel lenses, there are other optical artifacts, such as if I'm in Beat Saber and the world is very dark and I bring in a very bright saber from the side, you can see it reflect in the middle of the lens. I'm not sure how else to describe it. You can see a faint ghost image over a black background of bright things at the edges of your vision. It's not distracting, even in dark situations, because it's only a very specific side-to-side place where that happens, and most of the time, the center is bright enough that you won't notice that, but it is something to keep in mind. However, it does seem like there's one problem that the Pico 4 and the Quest 2 share when it comes to lenses, and that's that it seems like you're playing kind of a lens lottery. People at the start of the Quest 2's launch, some people were saying how amazingly sharp it was, and others were saying how they couldn't believe that other people thought it was sharp. And I've been seeing stuff like that with the Pico 4 too. I've had 2 of these headsets now, which I might get onto later, and both of their lenses have been good, but other people have been saying that it's been really bad, and other people have been saying that they've returned it and then got a way better one, or sometimes got a way worse one. So be careful. If you think the lenses are horrible, try returning it, because that is not my experience. It's also been nice having a granular IPD selector again. I think Pico 4 went a bit bougie with it. For whatever reason, it's motorized, but you can now go in 0.5 millimeter increments and pick your exact IPD rather than the Quest 3-step thing, which is nice, and I'm not going to complain that they're making a more robust mechanism, but having a motor seems like a kind of pointless addition of complexity. And also, the Quest 2's thing never really got in my way. Even though my IPD was in between one of the 3 presets, you could do that. Like, you could just put the lenses halfway between the thing and it wouldn't feel super snapped in there, but the lenses would move and it would be perfectly clear. Though, at least now with my IPD, I won't have to suffer with square edges to my VR experience like I would with the Quest, because it only had one display that both lenses were looking at. I'm pretty sure this has 2, one for each lens. That higher FOV does come with one drawback though. It's going to be harder to stream PC VR games because you're going to need to lower your foveation settings. For those unaware, I had an explanation of this not too long ago, but foveation is where the edges of your vision are blurrier, which can save the computer resources, whether it's rendering them or just encoding them, because the peripheral vision of yours isn't actually very high res anyway. And then the example I used in the previous video, look to the side of some text and try to read it, and you'll realize you can't. The problem, though, is if I use the same settings for foveation as the Quest 2, which were only noticeable if I actually looked into the edges of my vision, but if I was looking straight, then I wouldn't notice it. Those look horrendous in this, which is a good thing, because the pixelation that was going on at the edges of my vision was masked by the badness of Fresnel lenses, and also partially just because those lenses were smaller. It's not all about pancake lenses. These are bigger lenses, but a combination of them being pancake lenses and bigger lenses means that pixelation at the edges of my view were really obvious, so I've had to turn that down. All of that and the higher resolution, meaning that you're rendering about, I think, 9 million pixels before supersampling, and after supersampling I'm rendering like 13 million, I think. I'll put the actual numbers up here now. This is going to be harder to run games for than a Quest 2. If you've got a lower-end computer, you should probably upgrade your graphics card before upgrading to this. Since it's clear that I really just want to get to the PC VR experience, I'll go over the rest of the hardware now. The volume buttons are on the top right of the headband of the headset, and I do accidentally press them when adjusting it sometimes. There is no 3.5mm jack, which some people might find frustrating. I never used it with the Quest, but USB-C adapters do work, which is at least nice. And the pass-through, it's not quite hardware, but it's not part of the game streaming bit, so I needed to mention it here. It is much sharper than the Quest. A lot of people have said much sharper than the Quest Pro, which is interesting, but I've heard people say the Quest Pro is only about as sharp as the Quest 2, just with colour. I'm not sure if that's true, but the Pico pass-through does look pretty good, though the 3D effect is less convincing around the edges, but the edges didn't exist on the Quest. The FOV was much lower. So, it's a lot better, and it's in colour, and it's good enough that you can actually read your phone if you kind of put it up to the front of the headset weirdly. So, it's pretty nice. The stock facial interface deserves a single adjective: hard. It is solid and not very comfortable. Beyond just uncomfortable, actually. When you first put it on, it feels fine, and the hardness is kind of nice because you're confident that the foam won't just go soft over time and just leave you pressed right up against the plastic. The problem is, after a few minutes, it's already less comfortable than if you were just against plastic. This gave me headaches. For the first time in VR since I had the first generation Rift with the wonky head straps that they had to replace with other ones, VR has given me a headache just from the headset being on my head. It pushes against my forehead. The pressure is really uneven. Like, I could either get even pressure on my face by tilting the headset down a bit, but then I couldn't see well because my eyes weren't aligned with the lenses anymore, or I could see well, but pretty much all of the pressure was on my forehead, and it was really uncomfortable. Like, I actually felt bad for another hour after having this on for half an hour. It's not comfortable. You should buy the alternative. It cost, in total, tax and shipping included, £16 off AliExpress to replace it, and you really should. As of yet, because of the uncomfortableness of the original facial interface and the fact that I only recently got the AliExpress replacement, I haven't killed the headset in one go. But based on hearing other people and seeing how much percentage I lose in about an hour, it seems like you'll be getting 2.5 hours-ish, typically. Lighter things, you might be pushing 3. It's very similar to the Quest 2, but pushing a bit higher. The headset has a physically larger battery with more capacity, but it's got stronger backlights and a more powerful CPU, so they about counteract. Also, the balance is excellent. If I've got a Quest 2 here, even if I put my thumb here, I give it an opportunity to not go down, it will eventually slide back. It's really front heavy, even with the Elite strap. But the Pico 4 will probably act... Oh no, actually, yeah. If I put it in the middle, it will actually stay balanced. And I think it's a little bit heavier than a Quest without an Elite strap, but it's a little bit lighter than a Quest with an Elite strap. And although the back is definitely not super cushy like an Elite strap is, the Elite strap isn't really a cushion, but it is flexible. It does mold to the back of your head. I haven't had the back of this one be a problem. It's fairly comfortable. It feels very similar to an Elite strap to me, honestly. It comes with all the same benefits, and it's a bit lighter than a Quest 2. But more importantly is that weight distribution I showed at the start. So it's about half and half, which makes it feel much lighter. But now, how does it feel to play PC VR on a Pico 4? This won't be an in-depth look at, especially not Virtual Desktop, but also not ALVR. If you want to look at those pieces of software as a whole, there is other content. I'm looking at how they relate to this headset. But before ALVR and my short note about Virtual Desktop, the Pico Streaming Assistant, which is their analog to the Oculus Link software. Compared to Virtual Desktop on the Quest, which I tried for about an hour and then refunded because I had big problems with it just wouldn't let me stream anymore, but I tried it for a little bit. Compared to Virtual Desktop on the Quest and ALVR on either headset, the Pico streaming software, the colors just look really muted, and despite the brightness of the headset, it seems like the colors are artificially made darker and less vibrant, and I'm not sure why that would be. I just know I'm not sure how to fix it, and the Pico streaming software has a distinct color profile. Also, the resolution settings being called Smooth, HD, and Ultra are just silly, because that means nothing. None of them are HD, and smooth is not a number of pixels. However, I didn't even know that was a resolution slider, because those things also change the bitrate, so I thought those were just bitrate presets, but I figured it out eventually. The software isn't super intuitive, and once you understand it, it's got all of the simplicity of Virtual Desktop, but without the polish, and then it lacks all of the customizability of ALVR while still having all the usability issues that older versions of ALVR used to have. The bindings for controllers can be problematic too, since you might see it as a good thing that they do use the Pico controllers in Steam VR, unlike other pieces of software which just emulate Quest 2 ones. But that means that a lot of games won't have special made bindings for them, and you'll just have to hope the automatic ones are fine, or make your own. All of those issues, though, would be fine. Actually, I've got another issue that's fairly minor. It needs administrator permission to launch, which isn't something that Virtual Desktop and ALVR need, and I trust that it's not malware, but I also wonder why they couldn't have just designed it better and not needed that. But anyway, all of those issues so far are fairly minor, if kind of pointlessly weird, but there is a big issue that I can't solve and can't even really capture. You know bad electronic image stabilization, where you'll move the camera, but then it will compensate and not move the frame, but then you move the camera too much and then it snaps to the side. That, but my view in VR, it made me sick. It's horrible. It seems to mainly happen when things at the edge of the frame would change. Like if I was playing Beat Saber, then I would need to be kind of dancing along to it, like I'd have to be moving side to side, and then whenever my saber would come in from the side, when I would make a swing, then it would snap to the left and snap back, and it was just really sudden, really jarring, and it made me sick within the first Beat Saber song. Overall, it's not great, and probably for most people, it will be usable, and it's lower latency than Virtual Desktop or ALVR. But my issue specifically makes it unusable, and so beware. I've got a 6600 XT and a Ryzen 5600. If you've got parts in common with me, just know this is something you might experience. Virtual Desktop is Virtual Desktop. I'm not going to talk about it much here because I don't much care for it, given that ALVR has worked just as well for me and is open source. However, I should tell you, just for the sake of being honest, even if I don't prefer it, it is available in the Pico store, but obviously it's not cross-buy. If you've come from a Quest, you'll have to buy it here too. Now for ALVR. The XR2 was really not made for decoding video like this. A bitrate in the low 100s and with H.264 is necessary for smooth frame delivery in this headset, at least right now. Since we're working at 4320 by 2160 video encoding at 90 Hz, that's 8.39 billion pixels per second. And if we compare that to the Quest, it's actually about the same. We're encoding at a lower resolution, 3664 by 1920, but at 120 Hz. We're almost exactly the same number of pixels per second. But it just does seem plainly like the higher resolution matters more than the actual sheer number of pixels going through increasing because of a higher refresh rate. Since if I use the same settings that I used on the Quest, which is H.265 at about 150 megabits per second, which was fine on the Quest, it just there are very constant losses of frames here, and you can see the decoder latency spike up and the client loses a frame. That just happens with the bitrate too high. That, if I was still on Windows, might be a deal breaker. Even if I could use 150 megabits per second, that kind of bitrate with H.264 still looks pretty bad on Windows with AMD's own encoding software. Though you should know, realistically, if you're on an NVIDIA GPU, you should be fine. But on Linux, we don't use AMF. You can, but I tried to set it up once and didn't succeed. We use VAPI, and bit for bit, it seems like it can push a better quality image, which means it's not so bad on Linux. Later nightlies of ALVR have had an encoder rewrite, and actually the quality is worse, but I use the build of ALVR from the 9th of March of 2023, and that right now is working pretty decently. Which leads to a weird situation where Linux is just actively better for VR, which isn't something I expected. Also, you might be wondering, why am I even on a nightly? First, I would use it anyway, but secondly, the latest stable release of ALVR doesn't have OpenXR support, meaning you just can't use a Pico 4. But the latest nightlies do. Also, the process of installing it is much better than on a Quest. Where on a Quest, you have to give Meta a card number or a phone number, and then you sign up to be a developer, and then you put it on the Quest from a PC, or I think a phone is supported now. On the Pico 4, you install an APK like you would on a phone. You go to the browser, download the APK, and install it. It took me a bit to figure this out because I was searching how to sideload things on a Pico 4, and I wasn't finding many results. That's because, why would you? Why on any other device would you have these weird limitations that Meta sets? The Quest sets a weird and bad precedent for sideloading things. On the Pico 4, it just makes sense. And you can still sideload things with ADB if you want to. Besides that, it's ALVR as you know it, with all the problems, that it's super customizable, and all the good things, that it's super customizable. Really depends who you are. I lean more into the it's good camp, though. All of that's good, and a feature request of mine even got in. You can now disable haptics. Which, why would you want to disable haptics? Well, when the controllers vibrate, the tracking goes really bad. If the controller is vibrating and still, they kind of shake in place, but if you're moving them around, this shakiness becomes way more exaggerated, and it means that in Beat Saber, you're less accurate, and in FPS games, you're, well, less accurate, but now in FPS games, I don't know why I separated them. If you play Beat Saber, you're most likely going to want to disable haptics. But in other games, you're probably going to be fine. You will notice it in menus. You'll go through a menu that vibrates when you're, pointing over it with the controller, and it'll shake in your hand, and it will be frustrating. In the game, you probably won't notice it. And if you don't play Beat Saber, I probably could get away without telling you this, and it wouldn't be a problem, except for in menus. But at least I'm making a solution for it. Oh, I can get the 3D printed thing. I'm making a solution for it, which you don't get to see too closely because video coming soon. You should know, at least though, that haptics intensity beyond, once it's beyond the level where it does start going crazy, which is on the bar in the Pico software, the minimum level, so that you can't really get rid of this in games yourself. Once it's happening, it happens regardless of the intensity, and the haptics intensity doesn't come maxed from the factory, so if you're gonna stick with haptics, you may as well max them. Other than that though, ALVR on this headset is a good time, as long as you know about the decoder issues and how to remedy them. Otherwise, you might do what I did, and buy the headset, have a bunch of problems, spend a while trying to fix it but not quite get there, return it, and then go, oh, maybe I could have tried X, and then rebuy it. That's why I've had 2 of these headsets. Sadly, though, that doesn't mean the problems are entirely done, and we're probably getting now to the biggest one: latency. If you're coming from a Quest, this is either going to be a huge issue or something you don't even notice. And I do think that the latency actually hinders me at the height of my physical ability when it comes to Beat Saber. This headset has an excessive amount of VSync. It's not entirely about this. There are other issues that the ALVR head devs have acknowledged when it comes to latency and smoothness, while talking to them in their Discord server. However, a big thing is that this headset has about 40 milliseconds of VSync, which is just excessive. The headset is spending a lot of time doing nothing. All things with VSync on will have VSync latency, and the Quest does too, but it's about half what the Pico has. And so it's just adding a bunch of unnecessary latency, and we can't disable it. Once properly set up, I'm generally hovering in the mid to high 60s, low 70s, but sometimes the decoder queue latency, which again, for most people is just some nebulous thing that means nothing and they don't know how to fix it, the decoder queue latency will go up, and then sometimes I will be in the 80s, but generally it's 60s to 70s. Whether this is a deal breaker for you or just something you don't even notice probably mainly depends on your prior VR experience and your resistance to simulator sickness. It's not terrible, but I just felt like I absolutely had to mention it. Take advantage of wherever you're buying this from's return policy. If you're in the UK, it is law that if you buy something online, you get 14 days after to just say, I don't like this, and the seller has to take it back, no questions asked. So see if that's a thing. I don't know if that applies to individuals, but I know it does to actual shops. So see if you've got something similar. Try this, make sure you've got no issues before the return period is over. Back to good stuff though, it's very clear that the higher clocked version of the XR2 that's in this headset gives it some more headroom, since when I open the Oculus dashboard when I'm on the Quest 2, everything becomes really stuttery, and it stays that way if I start to screen capture. But on the Pico 4, that's not the case, which is quite nice. Other than that though, I think we're done with ALVR. I've still got a few things left to say, but we're not quite at the end of the video yet, so I'm gonna rapid fire through these. Smart audio optimization is basically just a huge bass booster, which, if you're at higher volumes, should probably be left on. It does sound a lot better, even if that's kind of the stereotypical, normie V-curve audio. When you're working with drivers that are so far from your ears and so small, massively EQing, just raising the bass, is probably a good move, unless you're at low volumes, because then you can only hear the bass. It just removes the highs entirely. But generally, I think you should keep it on. And at medium volumes, I do think that this and smart audio optimization is better than a Quest 2 in terms of sound quality. Next, if your eyes are too far away or not quite centered, there will be some uncomfortable lens distortion. You're going to want to have this headset solidly on your head so that your eyes don't shift in relation to the lenses. Because it's so wide FOV and they haven't corrected for that perfectly, the edges of your vision kind of stretch outwards like a wide angle lens would, but it's not bad. You're just gonna have to trust me on it. It's really not bad. You don't really notice it unless you just first put on the headset and you keep looking side to side and you go, oh, the edges are bending, but you don't realize later, unless your eyes aren't centered, because then the distortion isn't quite centered either. So that's something you should know about. It's not a big problem, but it's something that I had problems figuring out at first, because I would put the headset on slightly differently every time, and I'd be like, oh, the distortion feels really bad, but then I put it on next time, and it would feel completely fine. It's always visible if you look for it, but it doesn't get in the way as long as your eyes are centered. Next, compared to Quest 2 controllers, these are hefty. They're not actually very heavy, they're not uncomfortable, nor do they feel horrendous, nor are they actually that massive. But when playing Beat Saber without any straps to keep them on my hands, when doing a big swing, which normally you won't do because you're meant to use your wrist more in Beat Saber, but if you're just playing a slower song and you just want to get into the groove and you're like, ooh, like you're basically dancing to it. My dog wants to knock my laptop off. If you're basically dancing to Beat Saber songs, these controllers are gonna feel like they want to leave your hands, and so I would probably invest in some index style straps for them. It's a shame because if someone wants a standalone headset, I'll still probably recommend the Quest 2 because it's got Beat Saber, and the Pico 4 does if you stream PCVR with it, but it doesn't standalone. And Pico isn't immune to criticism here. They're not some scrappy underdog trying to save VR, and they would get a lot more sympathy from me with the problems this headset has if they were, but they're owned by ByteDance. That's the company that owns TikTok. It's just, at least it's not as horrible. Like, maybe Pico wants to be as bad as Meta once they gain more market share, but at least right now, they've got specs that are competitive without this monopolistic attitude to their platform. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Subscribe if you'd like to. Let me know on the Discord server what you think of this headset and of my opinions here. Pico is imperfect, and the fact that they're owned by ByteDance isn't great. But I could not possibly stay with Meta after everything they've done once this alternative came. Hopefully you've enjoyed, and bye.